Hello, welcome, and also welcome to the people watching this on Twitch. I'll have the recording saved so we can watch this. Hopefully there'll be video with both of us on YouTube anyway. But for my audience who may not know him, this is Simon Webb from History Debunked on YouTube. Simon, why don't you introduce yourself to my small audience?
Okay, well, I write books chiefly on social history, but also archaeology and anthropology. And I have a YouTube channel called History Debunked, which, for various reasons, seems to mainly concern itself these days with race and ethnicity.
Yes, and this is indeed what we are here to discuss. So, what is it? But I wanted to ask first as kind of an icebreaker to get us into it. Like, what got you into history? What got you writing about history?
Oh, I've always had an interest in history. That would involve my relating my whole life story, which I don't think is anything to the purpose. But I've had a great interest in history for many years, decades. So yeah, it's just one of those things.
That's fair enough. Did you what's the word? So you've been writing for quite a while, haven't you?
I have, yes.
Yes. And you've got a fair few books published, some of which I had not read, but I've sort of seen around, as it were. Especially, I think your one about Rome and London, I saw it at some point. Maybe you know.
I've got about 70 or 80 books in print, but a lot of those are westerns, which you almost certainly will not come across.
No, I am rather rude and uncultured, and I tend not to read much for pleasure, except for like medieval literature, which is what I'm doing my PhD in. This is my jam, as it were. Very fun stuff, in my humble opinion. Also forgive there have been Skype notifications going on. I want to discuss a few points. So we'll start off with the elephant in the room being critical race theory, because like to give like my perspective a bit on it, I I have a bachelor's in archaeology and anthropology, so I've done some stuff on like racism, the biology of it, etc. So there's that. I've got a master's in medieval studies, and then I'm doing my PhD in literature. So that's where my sort of educational background is, and
Hmm.
yeah, so I've got a decent range, and I can discuss a few things. I've not done tons of critical race theory at university. My greater expertise is in queer and gender theory, but I can talk about critical race theory as well, to a limited extent. I wanted to talk about yeah. So let's start the discussion on critical race theory by just defining our terms. So for those in both of our audiences who may not be familiar with it, what would you sort of define critical race theory as?
I really wouldn't like to try and define it. I actually merely discussed one aspect of it in one of my videos, which of course was standpoint epistemology. Um, the rest of it, intersectionality and so on, and narrative history, um, I, phew, why don't you tell me your definition? I mean,
Well, I because you've done like a video on it, like I would have
I
assumed
did a
you.
video about standpoint epistemology. I didn't go too deeply into critical race theory as a whole thing.
Okay. It was something that confused me because standpoint epistemology, from what I was able to find, is a theory originating with the works of Immanuel Kant in terms of its philosophical origins, but then also sort of mainly being developed by a feminist scholar. Um, but like we'll go on standpoint epistemology for the time being. How would you define standpoint epistemology so we know what we're talking about?
That it's a theory of knowledge that depends upon the perspective of an individual rather than an attempt to find something broader, things that can be said generally.
Yeah, I would say so in like a broad sense. And so it is used sometimes in critical race theory. Part of the problem is if we don't have like a specific author who is talking about critical race theory, and using standpoint epistemology in that sense, it's hard for me to respond to this or talk much about it because I sort of can't defend authors who haven't. I can't defend critical race theorists who haven't written about the standpoint epistemology. From your video, the closest thing I could find was I don't suppose you've heard of a book by a psychiatrist, Dr. Derald Sue, on microaggressions.
I've come across it. I haven't read the whole thing. I'm vaguely familiar with it.
Yeah, I read it like years ago. It's
Mm.
fine. So my memory on it is shaky as well, but that's the closest I could find. But he's not writing about sort of philosophy or epistemology or truth. Like his concern as a, I believe, psychologist is that he's more concerned with the extent to which microaggressions, however defined, well, he defines it, but like how microaggressions psychologically affect the individual. It's not so much a matter of truth. But like to talk about critical race theory, I suppose I would define critical race theory as just like a series of framework which examines the matter of race in society from the perspective of social critique. So, criticizing inequalities to do with race in society, critiquing the concept of race, and trying to examine ways in which it may be, I should say, flawed, incoherent, etc.
Well, you seem to have the facts at your fingertips there, Bella, and no mistake. Yes, that sounds reasonable enough.
Well, because I have a degree in anthropology, and
Of course.
yes, from Oxford no less, which is partly why the Rhodes Must Fall campaign is quite interesting to me, which we'll talk about in a second. Because I've sort of walked past the statues that you discussed in your video, and I have seen unfortunately I've seen a well no not unfortunately there was a poor guy who was compelled to do he had a really powerful demonstration outside of Oriel, I believe, College, where this statue stands, and he dressed up in a slave costume. He was bare shirt. He had a sign, and he had the chain around his neck. It was very evocative, and I've seen sort of from talking to him and to other people the sort of the pain that like Rhodes must fall. Sorry, the sort of notion of having a statue for Cecil Rhodes shows. But let's focus
Wouldn't
on
even notice it with the naked eye if you were walking down Broadway. I don't understand this at all.
I don't
Unless somebody drew
I
your
don't
attention to that statue, it's right up on high. Is it the second or third floor?
well, the word exalted in Latin literally means sort of in a high position, and
Indeed so, but I mean, what I'm saying is you wouldn't even notice that statue if people didn't keep banging on about it, would you?
I mean, I think I certainly noticed it. It's really big. Um, so I should mention I'm sharing my screen. I believe you can see sharing my screen. I will make some notes as we go along. So, what is critical race theory? And I should point out that what I'm saying are not like facts. These are just like what my limited understanding of these subjects are from like what I've done at different universities. So I'll say that for the time being, critical race theory is a set of theories examining issues of race from a critical perspective. Right. So in a different video of yours, I think it's in Racism, a very short introduction, a very short review.
Hmm.
You talk about the idea of race being like a social construct. So what to you would like, what would you say it means to say that race is a social construct?
That there's no biological foundation for it. It's simply a matter of perspective that we create races that there's no such thing as an Oriental race, no such thing as an African race or a Caucasian race, that we look at people and we decide, we fit people into categories. So it's something which is done, it's free creation of the human mind.
Right. Yes, sort of, yeah. I mean, I would modify that slightly, not to say that saying that race is a social construct means that there's absolutely no biological basis, but it's rather saying that race in society is referring to the way that our society perceives that reality about it. Like, you can have colors, right? But you may be aware that, and that's a result of light waves reflecting off of certain objects in different ways. But different cultures have different categories in how they perceive those colors for the same objects. So when we're talking about race or gender or disability or anything like these as social constructs, we're talking about the ways in which society interprets and responds to these biological factors, which can be quite real. So, like with race, people aren't. I don't think any critical race theorist is claiming that there's absolutely no biological difference between different ethnic groups. The claim being made is that these biological differences are not meaningful enough to be useful as a comparative category. I can sort of speak from some degree of experience on this because I did a module on osteoarchaeology, which is the study of the skeleton, and
Mhm.
we learned about the sort of they used to call it phrenology, the ways in which people would try to classify race based on morphological characteristics, so the shape of skulls and such lot. And
That sounds anthropometry rather than phrenology, is it not?
I may be getting my terms mixed up. Mea maxima culpa if I am.
Phrenology, no,
Fr-
phrenology is the idea that parts of the brain can become enlarged, and that shows in the skull. So you can feel lumps on people's skull telling you certain things. Anthropometry is the measurement of skulls and other body parts. There we are, you've got anthropometry. That's it, that's anthropometry. You can measure various bits of the body and you can make conclusions about race and ethnicity based on those measurements. It's like a little bit different from phrenology. Phrenology is a
yes.
pseudoscience.
Yes, you are. I got my term wrong on that. So yes, we're talking about anthropometry, and we're talking about sort of skeletal morphology in regards to
Mm.
race. And we found it. Oh, so the textbook I'd recommend for this is Brothwell 1969. It's a fun book called Digging Up Bones. It's like a basic introduction to how to tell what we can from a skeleton. And this book talks about how essentially you can't reliably tell an ethnic population from skeletal remains because the differences within a different group can often be greater than the differences between larger ethnic groups. So the broad set of trends which we in older textbooks in anthropology said these are sort of European, say, skull traits or African or Asian skull traits. Within Europe, there's too much variation for you to realistically say when you have a single skull that this is from Europe or this is from
Why, that's
Africa.
absolutely correct. Unfortunately, anthropometry is now being used as by anti-racists. It's funny. You're quite right. That's a discredited idea that you can look at a skull and say, "Oh, this skull is from an African," or "This skull is from a Chinese person." And yet, in several museums, I mean, I'm thinking of Eastbourne Museum. They found a skeleton near Beachy Head
Mm, mm.
and used anthropometry to decide that it was a black person. The same thing was done in York as well. And a number of reconstructions have been made. And anthropometry is now making a comeback, but only as regards rewriting history.
Well, so see, I sort of agree with that. And this is a thing that critical race theorists themselves argue about and critique and disagree with. There is a very good podcast that I'm subscribed to by a person by the name of Florence R. Scott, who is also doing their PhD in Old English literature. And it's called the Alf Yi Fu podcast. It's really fun and it's a newsletter. I recommend people subscribe to her. Florence R. Scott is the name. And they recently, in the last edition of this, they commented on the finds of these women you're referring to from, I believe, York, and how
Mhm.
essentially, sorry, this was Norfolk, but yeah, how it was done based on anthropometry. It was determined that these skeletons were black, and then people came up with all sorts of theories about this. And I agree that we need further DNA analysis on these things to determine their putative ancestry and such lots. But my point is that this is a thing that critical race theorists are critiquing. Like she herself there is doing they themselves there are doing critical race theory in critiquing the way that these skulls were described. So I think we can find a lot of common ground between critical race theory and what you are interested in doing,
I'm
perhaps in your
sure that's
field.
true.
Um, I often find with particularly with critical race theory, people talk about it, but they don't say what it is. People don't define it. People don't talk about specific authors, specific texts, and I sort of don't see much of a point in it. I mean, I don't see the point of having very strong opinions on something one doesn't know much about. It's a bit weird to me. But there we go. So we've done we've done race as a social construct. Yes, no such thing as a biological basis for race. I wanted to talk actually about some of the things that you talk about in this video, which I'm showing up on the screen. Racism, a very short introduction, a very short
Oh, right.
review.
Yes, I have the book actually here at hand. Go on.
Oh,
What did you
brilliant.
discuss?
Yes, so you talk about schizophrenia in the Black Caribbean population in the UK,
Yes.
and you talk about how there is a higher incidence for um, for schizophrenia in this population, and that therefore this is you're arguing that this is evidence of biological race being a biological thing and not just a social construct, right?
I'm not sure about biological, certainly some ethnic groups. It's really, I wouldn't say that there's a black race, you know. There are, I mean, even African Americans, however black they look, often have about a fifth or a quarter of white DNA. So it's rather tricky to use race here.
Well,
Ethnicity,
what would white DNA be?
Europeans, white Europeans is what I meant.
Okay, white European DNA. So would these be um what's it, DNA sequences associated with particular European populations? Because I'm not an expert in genetics by any
Yeah, there's
means.
been a lot of mixing because when slaves were brought from West Africa, there was an awful lot of racial mixing going on between slave owners and slaves, obviously.
Mhm. Um, okay,
It's
right.
we're really talking about people of African origin, rather than talk about different races. If we say that people of African origin probably have an increased tendency towards schizophrenia, I gave a couple of if you look at that
Yes,
video, look at the description.
I was about to.
Right,
Right. So
okay. I've
yes.
given a couple of references there.
Mm,
If you look at the polygenic risk score for schizophrenia,
yes.
now
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
that,
Mhm.
yeah, that's not a cultural affect. That is a definite thing that's been done worldwide, and
Okay.
those of African origin do have a higher score on that.
Okay. So this is. I'm not disputing that the polygenic risk score does associate. I like the study saying associated with ancestry.
Yeah,
Um, that notwithstanding, though, there are some confounding variables that I can potentially see with this study, which might cause issue with its findings. One of which being the perception of how schizophrenia is diagnosed, because schizophrenia, correct me if I'm wrong, is typically not diagnosed by means of a neurological scan. It's diagnosed on the basis of a patient presenting certain symptoms, right?
which absolutely causes problems because in let me try and see how I can put this. Now, yes, you're absolutely right about this. In idiomatic English, I might get irritated with you and say, "Oh, I'll kill you if you say that." It doesn't mean anything at all. It's completely. It is a way of speaking. It's a demotic language. I've known black people, Caribbeans, that will say that they'll torch someone's car or they're going to stab that boy up. It doesn't mean for a moment that they're going to
Mhm.
stab anybody or set fire to a motor vehicle, but it can be taken that way by a white psychiatrist. So if you have most psychiatrists are middle class white people, if you have a young black person becoming animated and using expressions like that, it may not be taken by a middle class white psychiatrist in the same way that he would if someone says, "I'll strangle him" or "I'll kill
Mhm.
him." So, yes, that certainly happens. And I don't doubt for a moment there's an awful lot of misdiagnosis of schizophrenia and other psychoses that are caused by that. Is that
But
what you were talking about?
well,
Yeah.
yeah. So you're like acknowledging that there are factors that make essentially black people in Western countries more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, but yet you're sort of citing the study as very sort of compelling evidence that the cause of that is a sort of biological, a racial
It all comes
element.
down to proportions and percentages. This is the devil of it. When there was old scientific racism, of course, people could make definite statements. They could pretend that all black people were in category A, all white people were in category B, and all Chinese people in category C. And you could make absolute statements. You can't do that now. All we can say is that black people or people of African origin might have an increased risk of so and so. Yeah, of course, it's going to be confounded by white psychiatrists doing the diagnosis. That goes without saying. We're talking always here about percentages and likelihoods. We're not talking in absolute terms at all.
Mhm. Another such criteria for examining biological race can be confounded by social variables. I wanted to talk also about one of the other links that you put, sorry, studies that you cited here, schizophrenia in Black Caribbeans living in the UK,
Mm.
which I have right here. Because I find it confusing that you cite this study as, again, saying how, like, it's a biological, talking about it being a biological factor, right? Ancestry in the incidence of schizophrenia, when the study talks about some of these factors we've been talking about. Here it talks about misdiagnosis,
Yes,
um,
absolutely. That certainly happens.
health
And then
service.
again, yeah. also, don't forget that you've got the two-hit theory in schizophrenia, where you might have a genetic disposition towards schizophrenia, and then a stressful life event will precipitate the disease itself. Now, I've heard it argued that this is what happened as a result of racism, because a black person might have a genetic disposition, but the experience of living in a racist society will trigger it. That will be the stressful life event which actually brings out the disease. So yes, that's certainly something to bear in mind as well.
You might have seen that said by this study that you cite, because it says that in the
Yeah,
conclusions, racism itself may contribute to
of
social.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I discussed that in the comments on the video. I get so many comments. I mean, I get hundreds of comments. I actually discussed this question there at one point.
Okay. Fair enough. I do feel that it's maybe a bit irresponsible to put this in a video claiming that, or sort of claiming or implying, however you want to put it, that like this is evidence that race is not a social construct and it's biological. When once we examine both of the studies that you talk about, we say, oh, actually, it is a social construct, and the studies themselves are saying it's socially influenced.
Yes, I see what you mean. I was actually responding specifically to what Professor Ratansi says in this book, because he listed that under racial prejudice, ethnic inequalities. I was pointing out that some of the things that he listed under ethnic inequalities, for example, the fact that people of African origin may well have an increased risk of schizophrenia, were not ethnic inequalities in that sense. We're talking there about a biological thing.
But
It's certainly complicated by the fact that there is racism in society, and it's certainly complicated by the fact that most psychiatrists are white. And if they're diagnosing a Caribbean, there's going to be difficulties in communication. That goes without saying, though.
I don't think it does go with that. I think it's very important to say it. And because this seems weird. It seems like you're saying it's biological on the one hand, and then you're saying, but it's also affected by social factors. I agree that
Of course.
there's
But the same goes for anybody with schizophrenia. If you do take the two-hit theory of schizophrenia, and generally it is accepted, that would go whether you were talking about Chinese people, Indians, or people of African origin. As far as racism goes, though, you've got to ask yourself this. It is diagnosed more frequently in people of African origin, but less frequently in people of Chinese origin, and less frequently in people of, say, Gujarati origin. If racism alone, unless the racists are very picky and specific, most racists that I've known, people that exhibit racial prejudice, don't like black people, they don't like Indian people, they're not fond of Chinese people. That racism is going to operate across the board. You have to ask yourself specifically, why is it people of African origin rather than people of Gujarati origin? Why is it African people rather than Seletis or Han Chinese?
well, there's certain factors that I can think of. So I don't think it's the case that like systematic or otherwise, racism affects all groups equally. I think there are certain groups which receive more and sometimes even more brutal kinds of prejudice. Now, this is talking about the US, granted. I could look up statistics for the UK also, but I believe, police brutality is significantly worse for Black Americans than Hispanic Americans or for Asian Americans. That's one example of racism affecting some groups more strongly than others. So, especially if you think about the plight of like a young black man in America right now who there are so many instances of police brutalizing and killing black people, even on video, very proudly, even with little or no consequences. Oftentimes, we've just got one recently, finally getting consequences in the case of Derek Chauvin. But one can imagine how people under that kind of stress, if they have the genetic predisposition to schizophrenia, may well have it triggered. Whereas a Latino person or a Chinese immigrant to the US with that same genetic factor may not have it triggered because they don't have the same degree of racial oppression in society.
And they don't have the same degree of crossing swords with the police as well. The average Chinese person in America is very unlikely to be out in the streets pilfering from shops or being a small-time drug dealer. The Chinese don't have much to do with the police.
Well, okay,
and it's the same in this country as well. The Chinese have less to do with the police. Gujaratis have less to do with the police.
Well, okay, so if we want to go into... Go on.
Sikhs have very little to do with the police. You've got to ask yourself, questions like that. This is a broad thing. Why is it that young black men are having dealings with the police? Is that purely racism? why is it that Sikhs aren't having dealings with the police? Is that racism? Is that social?
Well, okay, I suspect that if we talk about this more, it's going to become a thing where I say, well, here are some ways in which it is connected to racism. You say, like you said before, oh yes, I can see how that's connected to racism, but then you sort of don't change or modify your statement that like,
It's called a dialectical process. It's thesis, antithesis, and hopefully we will come to a synthesis if we talk long enough, or if your patience is inexhaustible.
I mean, I like to think I'm quite patient. I think I'm quite good at this kind of thing. Um, so
I can't. You surely you can't expect me to agree with you when I don't think that you're right.
well, I don't expect people to agree, but I'm sort of not here to necessarily advance my own viewpoint. I'm here to be a critical race theorist, and to critique um, the racial rhetoric of your channel, which is what we're doing in this discussion. But we want to talk about, mentioned Black Americans being more likely to be petty drug dealers and to have more interactions with the police.
Hmm.
So I've got some studies here from a very useful research document looking at facts and studies about this. One of the most damning of these is here we are. So this was a large-scale analysis of racial disparities in police stops. It's an enormous study of nearly 100 million traffic stops, which is
Hmm.
going to involve interaction with police conducted across America. Analysis found that the bar for searching Black and Hispanic drivers' cars is significantly lower than the bar for white cars, meaning they
Hmm.
got searched based on less suspicion. And
Yep.
additionally, Black drivers are less likely to be pulled over after sunset, when a veil of darkness masks from the race. So
Hmm.
unless you're saying that Black people after sunset, only Black people start committing less crime after sunset, and white and Hispanic people keep committing the same amounts of crime. It seems very obviously here that police are instigating more of these crossing swords with police because of these people's race. No,
Oh, I
it.
don't doubt for a moment that the police stop black drivers more frequently than they do white drivers. This again, we're coming down to percentages. I'm not arguing on behalf of the police, you know. This is really curious because the police behave badly, and no one would dispute that either. This is not a simple situation. It's not a simple situation where you've got a brutal white police force persecuting innocent black people. And it's not a case where all the black people are violent criminals and the valiant police force are struggling to control their crimes. This is often a case where both sides are doing things that are likely to cause trouble.
Well, okay, but you asked, is the greater sort of police interaction with Black Americans a product of racism? And I've sort of shown some good evidence here that, I mean, the fact that once people's race is masked, the rates of them being stopped goes down. Surely this is very good evidence suggesting that racism plays a large role in how often Black people interact with police.
And yet it's curious that they specifically mention Hispanic drivers and not those of South Asian origin. I'm wondering how the police will distinguish between them. There's a lot of drivers in India that are Indian, they're in America who are Indian. I mean, how often do they get stopped? They have dark skin, the same as the Hispanics and Latinos.
I mean,
I'd
I
like
don't.
to look more into that
Well, we
particular
well we
thing.
can do. We have a link to it, right? Oops. Yeah, we can redirect to this study. Um, oh, it's going to download the study. Here we go. Wonderful. Um, let us see. So I believe this is a meta-analysis. So it's looking at a data set
Mm-hmm.
detailing nearly 100 million traffic stops. Um, Black death lights stopped after sunset. The most widely cited national statistics come from the Police Public Contact Survey, which is based on a nationally representative sample of approximately 50,000 people who report having been recently stopped by the police. In addition to such survey data, some local and state agencies have released periodic reports on traffic stops in their jurisdictions and have also made their data available to outside researchers for
I've
references.
read this. I've read this. I've got down that far. How do they do the ethnicities? Have you
Good question. Data collection and standardization. Threshold test. So these are statistical analyses, which frankly I'm
Right, hold
not.
up. To run the threshold, assume the following information is observed for each stop. The race of the driver. That in itself is curious because how are you distinguishing then between a dark-skinned Hispanic and someone of South Asian origin? You know, we have a system here in Britain. You know that you've got IC3, which is Caribbean or black, and IC2 and IC1 and the rest of it. I'm wondering if the American police have a similar system.
It's possible. I'm not familiar with either that familiar with either British or American policing. And it's an interesting question to ask how they are analyzing this. I mean, one thing I would say is that the relative proportions of Indians in America, like Indians in America, is like probably far less than the percentage of African Americans. So
Yes, that's absolutely true.
that would probably give a good explanation for why.
Mm.
So, but it's an interesting question to ask as to how they identify race from the outset of people that they're pulling over. But I mean, it doesn't. I don't think it matters that much because it's still going to be, if they're putting people over when they see dark skin, it's going to affect African Americans more. It's going to cause greater interaction with the police. So, do you not see how this? Because you asked earlier, is this racism or not? Do you
How
not?
this can create friction between black people and police.
No, but you asked, is this racism or is this something else earlier? And I think I've shown that there's at least very good reason to suspect there might be racism at
You've
playing
shown
creating.
very good reasons for supposing that the police choose which cars to stop on the grounds of ethnicity. Yes. Is that altogether unreasonable? Or do you regard that as completely unconscionable under all circumstances?
Oh, okay. So what are you getting at with asking me
Oh,
that?
I'll tell you what I'm getting at. After the London bombings in 2007, was it, or 2005? Do you remember the bombings on the London Underground and so on? The police began trying to catch other bombers, and they were worried that if they stopped only people of Arab or Asian appearance, that they would appear to be racist. So they began stopping half men, half women, and also half people of South Asian appearance, and half white people. So I got stopped on that occasion, and it was completely mad because the police knew perfectly well that a 60-year-old white person was not going to be carrying out a suicide bombing. The people carrying out suicide bombings are almost always very young, sort of, in their 20s, and they're nearly all of either Arab, African, or South Asian origin. So on that particular occasion, the police were mad to stop a white person. There are occasions when the police are better off stopping certain ethnicities rather than others. It makes sense to do so.
But I don't think this is true because so there's a few things going on here. Like some of the research on traffic stops in the US suggests that even when whites commit or have contraband at a higher rate, here searches of white motorists were most likely to reveal contraband.
Mm.
But black people were still pulled over and searched disproportionately.
Yeah, yes, I dare say.
But in this case, like they have good reason to search white.
No, what I'm saying is this, that there are probably occasions when ethnicity should play a role when you're choosing whom to stop and whom to search. Geographical location is got another bearing on the matter. If I were looking for drug dealers, I probably wouldn't go down to Cornwall and start stopping people in small villages there. I would be more likely to be stopping people in the London boroughs, for example, London Borough of Hackney, London Borough of Lambeth. I think geographical location and ethnicity are both relevant.
Okay, I also want to get a source for this claim you made about like London policing and searching for the London bomber. I'm trying to find something presently. Race underway to identify bomber, perhaps. Like do you have any like?
No, that's actually is after. No, I'll tell you what I can do though. I can winkle it out because I've quoted that elsewhere.
Brilliant, that would be helpful. Let me take some notes while
It's
this.
called racial profiling. It's a very hot potato in policing.
Yeah, I know. Like I did sociology in secondary school. We learned
Oh,
about
well, there
policing and
you
how it
are
goes.
then.
Yeah,
You know all about it.
I don't know. I'm just familiar with like the basic terms.
You know enough for your purposes.
Well, I learned mostly about medieval stuff. I've not really done much on social science since
I'm
leaving
not
uni.
up to date with the stop and search and sus laws in the medieval period, certainly.
Well, I mean, we policing obviously was incredibly different back then.
Well, yes, I believe it
Yes,
was.
we can. While you find that, then let's
Oh,
segue
no,
to.
I'm not going to look
Oh,
now, because
yeah,
it
yeah,
will
okay.
involve doing something on my laptop
Yeah.
while simultaneously doing this. And I know you've got to bear in mind I'm about 109 years old, and that if I start using computers, something is bound to go wrong.
That's entirely fair. I mean, I tried to get my YouTube stream working for this and it completely failed, and my webcam is not
Yeah.
working for there. I'll just put a note, Metropolitan Police search equal quotas of ethnic groups after the London bombings. Brilliant. Let's then go on and skip a little bit down to talk about a different video you did about history, about something I'm a bit closer to. The BBC wished to replace long-standing historical expressions, and this was this video with this thumbnail, and it
Oh
was
yeah, about the Anglo-Saxons. Yeah, that was quite
yes.
funny.
So what is your like objection to how people in my field, because this is my field, are like debating the term?
Because in everyday life, I'm not an expert in medieval studies by any means. In everyday life, if you mention Anglo-Saxon history, people know what you're talking about. They know roughly about the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. They know that the Jutes came over and they know roughly which parts of Europe they came from. The BBC stopped using the expression, or they're trying not to use the expression, because, of course, Anglo-Saxons become synonymous in the United States with Caucasian. You're probably familiar with the expression WASP, are you, in America?
Yes, white
Yeah, okay.
Anglo-Saxon
Right,
Protestant.
exactly. That's why the BBC won't stop using it, because it's seen as being a racial term rather than an historical period.
So I mean, there's that, but you, I mean, so for one thing, you make fun of or you sort of scoff at the term early medieval England, in that, which is why? What's so funny about this term?
So really scoffing. You do know, I suppose, or perhaps you don't, that most of these videos are rather light-hearted. They're not, I mean, these aren't serious academic productions. These are little snippets that I've seen in the newspapers and I think are amusing. So I talk about them.
I understand, but that's what I'm sort of I'm because your channel is quite popular. You've got like 68 thousand subscribers. You're talking.
Lord, I didn't realise I had that many.
I mean, you're a public facing side for a lot of history. You're a published historical writer, and not just that. The reason I came across your channel is because I'm in a Discord server for um,
Sorry,
Medi.
what's this called? I don't know
Oh,
what that
sorry.
is.
It's a goodness, like a messaging and community application where you can share text, you can have video calls, you can share images, and we have lots of communities. Um,
Okay.
yeah, it's really fun. In my this will be going up on my YouTube channel. I have a link on my channel to where you can join my personal Discord server. It's mostly focused on medieval manuscripts, which is my area of greatest
Mm.
expertise and interest. But the point is that you're quite popular, and on one of the Discord servers, I'm regular in. I'm known as the sort of resident qualified historian, and people often ask me about history questions, and one of them cited you as a source. I think it's quite. That's why I sort of came across your channel, and I think um, you're reaching a large audience, and it's important, I think, to at least be somewhat regular. And I'm a bit worried about the claim you're making that it's lighthearted, it's not so serious, because that can be used as a way to not to avoid having to defend a point one makes.
Oh, people do that. But yes, if you're talking about this in connection with race, you're absolutely correct, because this is something people do a lot. They'll say something offensive and they'll say, "Oh, I was only joking." Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
Schrodinger's
Yeah,
Joker.
yeah, yeah. Yes, indeed, people do that. That is a recognised thing.
Yes, I would hope that you don't do that. But so early medieval England. Okay, so do you have any serious substantial issues with the term early medieval England?
I don't, except that it's more vague than Anglo-Saxon England. If you say Anglo-Saxon England, which is what most people do call that period, it evokes the Angles and the Saxons, and we know the period. If you say to the average person early medieval period, they won't know what you're talking about. Anglo-Saxons, oh, that's before William the Conqueror. That's a period roughly from the withdrawal of the Roman Empire until the Normans came. So it's a familiar period, and it tells us something about it, Angles and Saxons. Early medieval is a bit vaguer, and to the average person, it conveys little or nothing.
Well,
Obviously, for you, it does. You're an academic in that field.
yeah, no, but I mean, do you not think that like so the BBC when they're like putting out information about history, do you not think it's better for them to give the public as accurate information as possible? And with the term like Anglo-Saxon, part of the reason people in my field are reducing our use of it is because it's often misleading. I mean, there there were more. You even mentioned it. There were the Jutes as well, and some Frisians. There were more than
Well,
just Angles and Saxons coming in, but everyone sort of Germanic in Britain in this
well,
time
of course,
period
yes,
has to go.
yes, the Frisians are interesting because Frisian is actually the European language closest to English. I'm sure you're aware
Yes,
of this, West
yes,
Frisian. Yeah,
yes.
bread, butter, and green cheese are good English and good Fries. I'm sure you're familiar with that saying.
Well, exactly, yes. So that gets overlooked.
Hmm.
It also ignores, well, first of all, not all of Britain, at least in this period, it was under control of quote unquote Anglo-Saxons. We had Wales and Cornwall and Pickland and all
Yeah, the
of the
Celtic fringe, yes.
Dalmatia. Well, exactly, yes. And there seem to be large numbers of Franks there, Irish monks having monasteries in parts of England. So it's we can't really know. Let's say we find a skeleton from England dating to between sort of 1100 and 500 Common Era. Like we can't know from that skeleton whether this
No, it
person
might be
was.
a Frisian, it might be an Angle or a Jute. You're right. One has no way of
Saying
telling
they're
one.
from early medieval England is vaguer,
Hmm.
but it's also not misleading. And that's my personal. I would rather an interesting tidbit also to anyone watching. History with Hilbert did a video on the term Anglo-Saxon. He's a popular history YouTuber. He does and he's either studying. He should have finished by now his degree in Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic at Cambridge, which I very nearly applied for incidentally, and ended up doing archaeology and anthropology at Oxford. But then, in an ironic turn, I'm now doing a PhD in Old English stuff. The world's
Which
quite
college were
funny.
you at?
I was at Magdalen.
Okay.
Yeah, so I often walked by that Cecil Rhodes statue. We'll get to that in a bit. And and he has done a video on the term Anglo-Saxon where he shows a charter and he says, "Oh, see, the term Anglo-Saxon was used back then," and it was used back then. It just so happens that the text that he shows does not actually say Anglo-Saxon. He's just gotten his paleography a bit wrong. The text says Anglorum. And I left a comment on his video stating this to that effect. But the point of it is that part of the reason we're using it less is because Anglo-Saxon doesn't seem to have been something they called themselves, except in certain Latin language charters of King Alfred. The word in Old English is just, well, they would call themselves English. And even before we have Old English literature, we have the Venerable Bede writing, like 700s, who who builds up this idea of the term Angli, the English.
Not Angeli said
Yes,
angry.
non
Yeah,
Angli
yeah,
sons,
yes, yes, yes. I'm familiar with that.
yes, it's a very cute
And that's
story.
yes, but that also is curious because there's a tendency to try and avoid you talking with the English. It's a lot. Yeah, it's something I know about and I have feelings about.
I mean, you can go into those feelings if you want to.
No, 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 no. This is a purely personal thing. You're quite right, of course. I mean, there's no real objection to using the term early medieval.
Okay, cool. So let's lastly, I suppose, talk about the Rhodes Must Fall campaign.
Hmm.
So what do you?
You told me you saw a demonstration. May I ask what percentage of the people demonstrating were black and what percentage were white?
Oh goodness, I mean, it's not something I don't remember if I'm honest.
Well, the reason I ask is that all the things like that I've seen in Oxford, it seemed to be roughly 95 or 96% white, probably middle class people, and a very small number of black people.
To be
I was just
complete
wondering whether your demonstration that you saw was the same.
to be completely fair, there were not many there weren't many there aren't many BME students at Oxford.
Of course,
Um,
there's not. No, I'm perfectly aware of that.
in fact, we might be able to see images of it. Here we have some of them. Rhodes Must Fall.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
because there was a particular
Yeah.
guy who
Yep.
this is the
Yep.
statue
That's
in
it.
question,
Yes.
Cecil Rhodes,
Yes. I noticed that
Cecilius.
here.
Um, I don't think we're going to see a picture of the specific man in question. He had a well. Here are some of the kinds of signs and this was the exact place he was sitting. Incidentally,
Okay.
outside Oriel College, he had a really evocative slavery costume to demonstrate these things. But so what would you, I suppose, say that what's the aim in your words of Rhodes Must Fall, so that we know that we're talking about the same things?
Um, it's a political statement. People get worked up about some of these things. You can see in this picture here, workmen removed monuments to 18th century. That statue is barely visible to the naked eye. Can you see where I mean? Workmen removed, that's the one. You can see the statue is up there, and less people were drawing attention to it. No, who are these other people? Do you know who these statues are?
No.
Because you said you knew Rhodes. I mean, who are these?
To be fair, the Rhodes statue, if we look at it, it's got a massive plaque bearing his name.
I know, but I'm asking you out of curiosity. Do you know who those other statues are?
I do not. And also,
Right.
this is
How
London.
come?
This is not Rhodes Must Fall. This is
No,
this is
but in
London.
that case, how come you know that that one is Cecil Rhodes and you don't know who the other statues are?
Well, I've honestly not seen this. These are statues in a part of London I've not been to.
No, not that. I meant the statues below Rhodes. There.
I don't.
That demonstration, there are statues below Rhodes. Can you see? Rhodes is at the top, above the door.
This isn't Rhodes. This isn't Oriel College because I know because I've been there many times. This is. I'm
Well,
fairly sure this is not.
Sorry, this is. Look at the top of the thing there, and you will see Cecil Rhodes. That's it. That's a statue. That is
maybe.
Rhodes.
Hang on. Let me see.
No, it's not a question of maybe. That is the statue of Cecil Rhodes. There's not the slightest doubt in my mind. I'm familiar with that.
Let me see where the caption on the photo. That'll give me a.
Why don't you just Google Cecil Rhodes statue?
That's
Google Cecil Rhodes statue and images, and you'll come up with that. And you'll see it's got the barley sugar. Yeah, we are. That's the one.
That's the
Not
one.
the slightest doubt that that is the statue of Cecil Rhodes.
It says Rhodes.
Yes.
The feet.
Now look again at the thing, and I want to ask you now. You said, of course, you knew that was Cecil Rhodes. I want to ask you, how come you don't know the names of the statues near him?
But also, here's another one. A larga munificenza.
I don't think many people read Latin.
Out of the generous munificence of Cecil Rhodes.
Yes, that is so. But I wonder how many people in those demonstrations are able to read that Latin.
But they can read Cecil Rhodes. That's right there.
Yeah. Spelt in a peculiar fashion, but yes, that's true. So you don't know who the other statues are. You don't know whether they're people you'd like to see.
But I need to say, it doesn't matter, even if it's like just known around the town that this is who they're of. It's part of the mythology of Oxford.
No normal person looks up at those statues, do they?
Oxford is a tourist attraction. People are going through all the time.
I realise that people don't very seldom look up to the second floor and say, "Hello, who's that fellow with a hat there?"
Well, it's going to be in the tour guides, isn't it? This is part of the imagery and the history of Oxford. And does it not look like we're celebrating Cecil Rhodes with this statue?
Yeah, there's loads of statues around there. I mean, I know my daughter was at Oxford. I'm very familiar with that part of the city. There's statues to millions of different people, aren't there? Tyndall was burned there. Not Tyndall. You know, the statue to the martyrs, Latimer and Ridley, were burned there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are statues to them. I don't think, looking at those statues, I can't think they're going to be offensive to Catholics, are they, or to anybody else? There's many statues in that part of Oxford that you could probably find grounds for being offended by if you belong to some group or another.
I mean, yes, but Cecil Rhodes, from what I've heard of him, was excessively and viciously racist even for his day, and he had a huge role to play in racial inequality in South Africa.
And yet he insisted that black people had the vote, which is something you seldom hear about.
I mean, I did not know that in my copying to my own ignorance here, but I sort of don't care if somebody supported black suffrage if he was also a massive racist. Like that's
and of course when he founded the Rhodes scholarships, he specifically said that they must be open to black people, and one of the first Rhodes scholars in the early 20th century was of course black. It was a thing Rhodes was very particular about. He wanted to make sure that the Rhodes scholarships were open to everybody of any race.
Okay, I don't see what, because we're still celebrating with the statue somebody who has had very racist views and who represents, therefore, a lot of racism in present day society.
The same is probably true of most of the other statues there. I'll tell you what, I'm going to have to look in now to the other statues on the front of that college and find out about the people. I will guarantee you, sight unseen, and I know no more about those statues than you evidently do. I will guarantee to you that if I look at those other statues at the front of that college and find their names, I will find unacceptable views associated with those people whom those statues commemorate.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. But why? Who's to say that Oriel College shouldn't make the choice to take those down?
Well, perhaps they will. We'll see.
I mean that's something. All of the protest is saying, it's asking that Oriel College make the choice as a private institution. It's saying that you should make this choice to take down Cecil Rhodes because this statue appears to glorify and celebrate a person with rather despicable views who is somewhat more proximate to our own time period. Somebody in the Middle Ages probably did have rather bigoted views as we would understand them today, but we get that that person is very far removed from the present day, and we often don't know that much about their life. So we, I think it's a different matter having statues up of somebody from a certain length of time ago. Where that line lies exactly is a difficult question, but I do think it's a different matter.
Yeah, you don't think that all that crowd of middle class white students protesting outside there might be better off worrying about something in the real world? For example, there are more slaves in Africa now than there ever have been in history. That's something we can actually do something about.
Okay,
Yeah,
how
you
can we do
could.
something about it
Well,
from the
yes,
UK?
we could certainly work. We could start a campaign about that if we were worried about slavery. These are people that are suffering now. That
Why would
statue's not suffering. The statue's not causing anybody to suffer. There are
I?
slaves now in Africa that we could work towards having them freed.
I have talked to protesters who have felt that having that statue up there glorifying a racist in their university does make them feel very uncomfortable, and like Oxford is not a place for them. It does make them feel that way. Like we can say
I
that.
hardly like to ask what ethnicity the students to whom you spoke were.
Does it matter what ethnicity they were?
Yes, it matters certainly to me whether or not we're talking about middle class white people getting worked up
Well,
about something.
in this particular case, it was a black protester whom I was
Mm.
talking to on the matter.
Yes,
Um,
that does. Yeah, that certainly makes a difference because I can't help noticing that a lot of these things are driven by white people. I noticed when the statue was pulled down and thrown into the harbour at Bristol, there was hardly a black person in sight. It was all white people doing the action. So yeah, that does make a difference in a way.
well, yeah. So
There's a
this.
difference. Well, I'll tell you the
Hmm.
difference it makes. If I set myself up and start talking on behalf of black people, that's a hideously patronising thing to do. It would be different if I take offence on behalf of other people and don't let them say for themselves what they're feeling. That does make a difference. Yeah,
No, no,
you
I
must have
agree.
noticed that the crowd pulling the statue down in Bristol were all white. I'm sure you did
I
notice.
mean, no, it's not like it's not something I really notice. I don't pay attention. I don't. I also don't
Ah,
remember
you're
how.
colourblind. Excellent.
I'm not
No,
colorblind. I can see someone's color. I just
ah,
it's not. I don't know.
but it doesn't matter to you. It's
I
irrelevant.
unless it's relevant to the conversation, and I suppose it would have been. I don't know. I when I see a picture of a crowd, I don't notice its racial composition, unless I'm being told to. Like or how many like men women there are there relatively. It's just not something I see. Or like again, I see. I'm not colorblind. I don't. It's not something I pay attention to unless I need to for the purposes of a discussion. But yeah. Okay. Anyway, so I guess to close out, my point would be that I've seen in the comment section of your videos, and you're right that you're sort of doing more like demotic history, which I think is good. And on my YouTube channel, I try to make education about history more accessible to
Hmm.
the public. But I I feel that even then there is a duty for us as like public communicators of history to get things right and to be precise in our terms and to show things as best as possible. But I also want to draw a distinction between critiquing sort of academics and academic critical race theory, academic critical race theorists, or any sort of history, and sort of, I guess, essentially people arguing on Twitter, to put it in crude terms. Like this whole thing of white people getting offended on behalf of black people, the racial dynamics of the crowds. Like, I understand, and I'll concede that certain parts of the online left do sort of, for instance, standpoint epistemology, they do sort of cling to and use standpoint epistemology as an argument, I think, in places where it's less warranted or where it's not that productive. But standpoint epistemology, as it's used, for instance, in academic discourse, is saying that in certain contexts, we should recognize that a person is more likely to have an accurate perception of a given social issue or a given situation because it more directly affects their lives. It's not saying that that person is always correct and we should always believe any person because of their ethnicity on the subject. And I think very few academics will claim that. Maybe a couple of, again, I don't see it that much, but I don't disagree. I'm sure a couple of people, or a few people even, on the internet, on Twitter, argue such a thing, and they argue that saying something is nothing. But I would ask you to question, and for your audience to question as well, like, why? So you see all this. Why do you think such views that like you can't challenge this unless you're minority or whatever? Why do you think these things get publicized the way they do?
Right, well, there's a couple of points here. I'd like to take you up on one point first. You said, talked about having a responsibility, uh, being on YouTube. You do appreciate, I'm sure, the difference between an article for a peer-reviewed journal and YouTube. You are familiar with YouTube, are you?
Yes, I have a channel.
Okay, YouTube is a fairly light, it's an easy going place. It's popular. It's where people put up videos of someone sticking a firework up their arse and setting it off, that sort of thing. It's not really an academic forum.
So are you saying people shouldn't take your videos seriously?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it's an entirely different thing. It's not an academic forum. It's not somewhere generally. I can't remember the last time that I started looking for references and sources on a video on
you seem
YouTube.
to have done so in this video here.
Absolutely I do. But I'm saying it's very rare. That's unusual. Go to YouTube and see how many referenced videos you'll find.
I mean, if
Another point is that these videos are very short. They're 5 or 6 minutes. There's a great limit to how much you can cover in that time.
Well,
They're more like fireside chats.
I asked at the beginning, can we define critical race theory? And I did it in like a minute. You could have done so in this video where you don't define critical race theory or name a critical race theorist, for instance.
I shouldn't have put a hyphen. I should have put a semicolon. I was dealing really only with standpoint epistemology, which is an aspect of critical race theory.
But you didn't.
So the hyphen was misplaced.
No, it's not. You didn't name a critical race theorist who's talking about standpoint epistemology. You cited a BBC article which does not talk about standpoint epistemology.
It doesn't It doesn't talk about standpoint epistemology, but it epitomizes a certain use of that particular way of thinking.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that, because this is one of the misconceptions I think that is had with standpoint epistemology. People think that what it means is because a person of color is saying something, this is what makes it true. Oftentimes, when standpoint epistemology is evoked, it's saying that they're more likely to have an accurate view that happens to already coincide with the statistics.
And less likely to be challenged on that view.
No,
that's something have you really never observed a black person in a group of white people talking about their experience with racism? You must have seen that. I mean, presumably you do knock around with black people.
If I'm honest, I don't have many like close black friends. To be honest, I don't have that many close black friends.
This immediately tells me that there's something. Okay, have you ever been in an ordinary working class black person's home? I mean, do you
I grew up
with black people, with Caribbeans?
I grew up in South London where there were a lot of minority people in my classes. Yes,
of course there were. How many black working class homes have you actually been in? To eat, to talk to people.
I have like a sort of acquaintance who is Somali. I've not been to his house, but
You've not been to his house. Have you ever been in a black person's home, out of interest?
No, but I don't understand what.
Okay, the point I'm trying to drive.
Actually, wait, no, I have. When a family from my mum's quiet, I've been to their house for like a party. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's just not something I pay that much attention to. Again, like
no, I'm sure you don't, because white people generally have white friends and black people generally have black friends. It's simply that I'm more familiar. I'm more likely. Okay, I'll be brutally frank with you. I've probably know more black people than I do white, or associate more with black people than I do white. And so a lot of what I'm talking about is based upon that. I've noticed that when I've been with a black person and the black person has been talking and there's a bunch of white people, especially, as I say, middle class white people, liberal types, if the black person speaks, they would all fall silent. And however tendentious. What is being said by that black person is not one of the white people dares challenge it for fear of appearing to be oppressive or racist. That's what I was referencing here in that video, not particularly that this is an essential point of standpoint of epistemology, that when a black person speaks, we must believe them immediately or we mustn't challenge them, but that in practice, that is the case. It is the case that if a black Caribbean is speaking to a bunch of white people about the experience of racism, they will feel hesitant about discussing it robustly or challenging it or saying, oh no, that's crazy, and giving facts and figures.
Well, so, but I think when somebody clicks on this video, the implication is that they're getting a discussion of critical race theory, maybe simplified for a general audience, to be sure. But I think the implication, right, is that we're talking about.
The implication is that I was planning to do more on it. So another video would say critical race theory, intersectionality, and it will yet come to that, but I've become sidetracked. So this is, yes, this is an aspect of critical race theory. It's not a general overview of critical race theory. It's a brief account of how one particular aspect of critical race theory struck me. And the fact is that when the BBC gave that account of that young woman's experiences, she said, I feel this and I feel that. She felt, those that haven't read it, her name's Mary Ibiyimi. She says that her name is preventing her from getting work. She says that she thinks that young black people have a higher level of unemployment because of their names. I thought that was crazy. I looked into it, found the relevant statistics, and I think, did I reference them or not?
Well, here we are. Here we are. I'm showing it on the screen. This is
okay.
This. I don't know why, because in that video you say that this argument doesn't involve sort of checking facts or statistics, when right below this quote, I feel, we have a statistic given by the...
That's from the BBC.
That compared with a rate
of... and it's not relevant. They're talking specifically about young black people. There's an illusion here. What happens is, if you now read it carefully, I feel if you're from the black or Asian community, she is specifically talking now about Asian communities as well as black communities. The next line, they're talking specifically only about black people. Do you see? This is bait and switch.
That compared with a rate of 24% for young people of Asian descent?
Yeah, this is slight. There's no mention of Chinese people.
Asian descent would include Chinese people.
No, not in Britain. It doesn't, unfortunately. In America, Asian means East Asian. It means generally Chinese. In Britain, when people say Asian, they mean South Asian. They mean Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. I actually raked out the figures for that, and I quoted them for those that are NEET, not in employment, education, or training between the age of 16 to 24.
Right.
What I'm saying is that young woman was saying she feels, but she didn't know any facts about it. She didn't give figures. She felt, she feels. I thought that it was a little bit odd that she didn't go to the trouble of finding out whether or not her name, and also these second figures here are not young black people, will include Caribbeans with European names. It's not, she is making a specific claim that if you've got a particular foreign sounding name, and I don't think Ibiyimi, it's an Ashanti name. I don't think Ibiyimi is an unusual name or a hard to, she calls it what she calls a hard sounding name. And also, I don't think it's the case that if you're a plumber called, say, Piotr Andruszkiewicz, I don't believe that you're going to be unemployed, that no one will call you round to fix their pipes simply because you're called Andruszkiewicz and not Jones.
I don't think that's the claim. I think the claim is that, like, it's just an average, statistical average. You're finding it harder to find employment.
No, she specifically mentions hard-sounding names. That's the whole gist.
Yeah. Like, they're less likely to.
But is this true? Is it true?
What's the word? Well,
this is a statement. This is a specific statement in which she mentions the Asian communities, and I gave the. I've looked into the figures. When they talk about people of Asian descent, by the way, they're including here people from Bangladesh, Pakistan, India. So immediately you're lumping a whole lot of people into one. Not just Indians, not just Gujaratis. Which Asian communities? Which black communities? And why does she think that having a hard-sounding name will make it less likely that you'll be employed?
Yeah. UK jobless rate by ethnicity.
Do look at the government figures. That's a left-wing charity.
Resolution Foundation.
What if you do government UK?
Wait, I'm confused. Government UK. What's your point? It's not
If you Google ethnicity facts and figures and statistics from the British government, you'll find the figures there.
Yeah, okay, we can do this.
It's in an easier form as well.
Yeah. UK government statistics.
Ethnicity, put ethnicity, and then put say Chinese employment, or add something like
Okay, so here we are. Ethnicity facts and figures.
yeah
I think
yeah
this is
yeah
the
yeah
website you were
yeah
talking
yeah.
about. The main facts and figures. Data sources. Let's have a look at this. Types of survey data. The source is the annual population
And you can break
survey.
it down into young people, and it will be broken down further into Chinese, Indian, Caribbean, and so on.
Annual population survey.
This is not specifically young people. Her claim was specifically young people. So I checked out the figures for ages 16 to 24, which I took to mean young people. This is for all age groups. You're going to have to plow through an awful lot to get
Yes,
young people here.
I'll do that a different time. But I want to talk about more so like how this quote by her and this interview with her is being used within the article, because you seem to in your video focus on the first half of the article, which interviews Mary Amy and talk
Yeah.
about talk about and it has quotes from her talking about what she feels about the situation, and then it includes, like we've said, statistics from these think tanks now and these organizations. Now, whether these statistics have been poorly compiled, it's beyond the scope of this discussion to have a proper dive into, but I encourage everyone watching, if they have the training to do so, to have a look at the ways in which they're compiling the data. But then right afterwards, we have analysis by Priya Patel, BBC business
Yeah, I
journalist.
read that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we talk about the statistics. So I think what this is doing, the way, when I read this, when I read the quotes from Mary and all the rest of this, what it seems to me, it seems like a way to personalize things to the individual. Like there's the famous quote from Stalin. I don't know for sure if it's true, but whatever. But the
No,
quote,
no, no. The title of the piece is "Employers Ignore You If They Can't Pronounce Your Surname."
in
That
quotation
is the
marks,
theme. But that's the theme. That is
yeah,
the
but
theme
it's
of
in
the
quotation mark.
article.
They're acknowledging that it's a
It's a
quote.
claim. It's an unsubstantiated claim.
But well,
And
that
immediately below it is a picture of a black woman. And as I say now, a lot of people are reluctant to challenge anything said, any claim made regarding race or unemployment or prejudice that is made by a black person, particularly since the BBC is also full of white middle class liberal types. They'll take it, it's a whole thing. It's taken on trust, and it's felt to be poor form to discuss
I don't think it is
robustly.
taken on trust, because Priya Patel gives statistics and her own analysis of these things afterwards. Priya Patel is looking at the stats and statistics for herself and is coming to these conclusions. I think that what this is it's different. What's the quote from Stalin? One death is a tragedy, 1,000 is merely a statistic. I think we struggle to relate to dry stats of these are the numbers of black and minority people who are employed in the UK. I think what this is doing, it's showing a face, it's humanizing the story, it's giving us, as like a sort of presumably not sociologically literate viewer, a means into this story for the average reader who maybe not too clued up in this issue. It's like, right, this is a human face. I can relate to the story. I can sort of look into her eyes. This is what she's saying. And then that's what the experts are saying. It gives them a sort of means of connecting with the story. I really don't think that the tone of this article is you cannot question what she's saying because she's black. I don't think that's what Priya Patel is saying.
No, she's not. You're absolutely correct. I was taking it to discuss in a broader sense what sometimes happens with claims of this sort.
I mean, okay, like I honestly can't sort of go based off like this and that you're saying of the way that your like social interactions with black people have gone. I'm not saying that you're like making this up, but I'm saying I can't know that, right? And my viewers, your viewers can't know that for sure. But regardless, I would say that neither your experiences nor my experiences are particularly are necessarily, I should say, going to be representative of society as a whole. And I would be cautious in saying that, or presenting my views on this matter as if it's indicative of a countrywide trend in sort of social relationships between races, and that my experiences are indicative of how people feel when they're talking about race, when I simply don't know how representative my experiences or your experiences
I
are.
don't think my experiences were at all indicative of anything or representative of anything. That was purely anecdotal evidence I was providing. I'm not
Well,
drawing any
that's the thing, is I
conclusions
feel
from that.
because I feel that this implies like it's going to be a discussion of the theory of critical race theory of the epistemology. And when I ask you about it, you're saying this is actually an anecdotal, it's a story time about my personal anecdotes.
No, no,
And
no, 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 no. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I've just been talking about my own experience of life, was anecdotal. This article, this piece is not. And I must remind you again that this is not a journal. This is not an academic peer-reviewed journal. This is YouTube.
yes, but
This
I
is
think
somewhere where people come on to chat about things. It's an informal thing. It's an idea. I'm throwing out an idea. It's had 18,000 views. People are discussing it, and people are discussing it with a robustness which they feel say, and they may be deceiving me. They say that they feel unable to discuss this sort of thing elsewhere. So I'm providing a forum. You would probably say I'm providing a forum for a lot of white racists or white supremacists, but people are discussing things in a way that they don't feel able to elsewhere.
well, okay, so I have mixed feelings about civility politics. Like for instance, I understand in literally like at a party maintaining a sense of civility and even sort of apolitical nature, because you want certain discussions can make people on all sides of a matter feel uncomfortable, so you want to keep in a sort of relaxed environment. But on platforms like Facebook, social media, which are essentially like modern day public squares, I don't like, even though they're private companies and they can do what they want, I don't like the fact that these companies often sort of remove people with, more like extreme right wing views, depending on how extreme. I don't like them being sort of taken off the platform. I hear that, but it sounds to me like you're saying, well, this is an informal space, therefore it doesn't matter if I like misrepresent the article that I'm talking about, or I give a I give a misleading perspective on critical race theory. Because my problem is somebody's going to look at this video, a lot of people I'm sure will look at this video and think they understand standpoint epistemology and critical race theory. And I've talked about how the way you present standpoint epistemology in this video is not really how it's used. It's
Sorry, so look, permit me to interrupt you for a moment. If I want to find out about critical race theory, I'm very far from convinced that looking at a 5-minute video on YouTube would be the best way to go about it. If someone, you seem to be saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are people in Britain and America who want to know about critical race theory, and instead of buying a book or visiting a public lending library, they will look at YouTube. Is that your contention?
well, I think for most people aren't going to, people who don't have the time, because maybe they're in a different field, aren't going to go out and look at it.
But I'm hardly sorry. If there's a concept with which I'm unfamiliar, and I decide that I will depend entirely upon YouTube to find out about it, then that's not really anybody's fault, is it? I mean, obviously I should read a book. Obviously I should go to the library and gen up on it. I'm really not answerable if people are so
Imagine if
so
we turned
slack that they can only find out about critical race theory through watching one of my videos. I
Well,
don't get that at all.
your video is presenting, because if your video is going to be one of the only means in which people find out about critical race theory, do you not think you have some degree of like responsibility to
I
represent critical race theory or a
don't
standpoint
have the
epistemology
slightest
fairly?
reason to suppose that my video is the only way that anybody will find out about critical race theory. And I have every reason to suppose that that's not true.
Well, because from
That,
looking at some of the comments, like I got the impression that people were conflating critical race theory with people like in their personal lives talking about racism. And I think we
oh,
really
yes,
should
yes, I'm
distinguish.
sure that's true. But the same thing would happen if they read a book. If you're determined to misunderstand a concept, then I suppose you could just as readily do it on the internet as you could in real life. So, yes, you seem to be saying, and tell me if I'm wrong about this,
Mhm.
that some people will watch that video of mine and then take mine to be the only interpretation of critical race theory. They will then feel that they understand critical race theory and that they will go away having misunderstood the point of it. Is that what you're saying?
Um, it's not necessarily that yours is the only source they'll do, but it may be one of the main ones, yes. And I'm worried that people will get a biased understanding of critical race theory.
I'm
And
sure they will get a biased understanding. All history is biased by the very definition, by the very act of choosing. You select things to look at. If you're looking, okay, in your particular field, there's no such thing as a unbiased account, is there, of, say, I don't know, the landing of the Angles and the Jutes in
well, no, no,
England?
no, yeah, no, maybe
You,
bias is the wrong
by the
word.
very act of writing a history, by
Mhm.
writing about that, you are selecting, you're going to put some facts down, you're going to omit others. You can't, there's no such thing as impartial history.
No, no, I shouldn't have said biased. You're right. I should like an inaccurate, maybe a misleading view of what critical race theory is. Because
Whether it's inaccurate, that's a debatable point.
if this video was like saying this is how I felt in if it was maybe entitled, and if the claim was these are my sort of experiences talking about race with people in my personal life, I would have no issue with it. But
I
you're
frequently do mention the fact that all these things are idiosyncratic. They're my personal view. I may not have mentioned it in that particular video, but I often do say that this is my view, that these are personal views. I'm not setting myself out as somebody who is going to explain. This isn't the Open University any more than it's a peer-reviewed journal.
I mean
This is YouTube.
you
This is where people come and they say all sorts of things. Some of it's sensible, some of it's wise, some of it's completely foolish, and a lot of it's misleading.
Okay, right. So you're saying that like the way you're are you conceding that the way you're presenting critical race theory, or at least in this video that we've gone over, is misleading?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying some of the videos that I produce almost certainly are misleading. I've made a lot of videos. If you made, I mean, how many have you made? Six or seven? How many videos on your YouTube channel?
I imagine fewer than yours, but I've
Right.
made a fair
If
few.
you made 200 videos and spoke, say, for an average length of time at 7 or 8 minutes each,
Mhm.
I'm fairly sure that some of those videos would be misleading, sometimes unintentionally. I've no doubt. I'm sure that you would end up saying things which could be misinterpreted
Mhm.
or could give people the wrong idea, or that were representing your personal view of some aspect of medieval history that other people would disagree with.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I even there's a video I plan to redo because I have like changed my position since having made
Sure.
it the first
Yeah, that
time.
happens. It's in the nature of the beast. That's what YouTube is.
But I don't know. To me, it feels like all of these are rather like seem to present your channel as if it's serious rather than like or that yeah you're meant to be taking it seriously rather than a light-hearted thing.
And you haven't
And
noticed how often I smile and laugh,
no,
or
I
I
noticed,
make wry comments.
particularly in the what's the word, the video on the BBC, wish to replace long-standing historical expressions. um I don't know. I guess like as a way of concluding, I would just like not even a matter of don't talk about this. I would encourage you to like just define terms at the beginning, because even your audience may not know what like critical race theory,
I'm
gender
not
theory.
lecturing at university. It's not.
It's but I think
This is not. This is not an academic thing. I'm not delivering a lecture to anybody.
but I
This is
again
informal. These are fireside chats. These I'm simply talking to people about a personal view.
yeah, but I
These are
think
my
with a
personal
platform
views.
comes responsibility to get things right. I think that's a reasonable standard.
You're saying that people on YouTube have a responsibility only to say what is strictly true and can be verified, and that anything on YouTube which is not veridical, which is not strictly true, should be removed. What do you
Well,
mean by
no, I'm
that?
not. I didn't say it should be removed. I never
No, but
said it should be.
what is your view on YouTube? I'm not sure.
Well, so what I was saying earlier about like platforms is that I feel that like sort of social media platforms like Facebook, YouTube, etc., which are essentially like modern day public squares, they should be
Mhm.
regulated as public utilities, and so sort of legal free speech provisions should apply, with the exception of very extreme content to what's posted on there. Like I don't like, for instance, that I don't know. I think was it? I'm not on Twitter, but like QAnon or something was recently. People supporting QAnon have been removed from Twitter and Facebook recently, as an example.
Could
Like
be so, yeah.
I don't like that policy, but I mean that's still at the moment their choice as a private company to make that choice. But it's a choice that I don't like.
But YouTube
Um,
have a perfect right to remove anybody. They have a perfect right to remove me. I can hardly object. And, I've been suspended more than once on YouTube, but I've got no complaint to make about that.
no, no, but
The-
my point is that like someone has a large following, a large number of people who are looking at them, and especially I think if one because you're a published historian, you're sort of setting yourself up as somebody who's educated on the subject. People are going to listen to what I had somebody in my Discord, cite you basically as a source and say, well, I got my views from Simon Webb, and I think people are
From what, one of
clearly
my books or from YouTube?
one of your videos. Yeah, he showed me the
Ah,
video on critical race theory.
yes, yes. I might mention here that I've had people contact me and ask how they can cite me. And yes, yes, you may well laugh.
No, 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 no.
No, no,
There are
no,
ways
no,
to cite a video. Yeah.
no, you do well to laugh. Unfortunately, I can't see your face, but I'm sure that when I said that, you started snorting. Yeah,
Well, no,
I
no,
had
no.
to explain very gently that there is I explained how if you're using Harvard referencing, you could cite a internet source, but I advised him strongly against it.
Well, good. I'm glad you did. No, no, it's perfectly valid. I last semester did because I have to do like taught modules for my PhD. I did one of my short assignments on like a YouTuber and got an A for that, and I cited all of her videos properly. So that was it does you can incorporate YouTube into academic work the right way, I think.
Yes, I wouldn't actually recommend it personally.
Oh no,
And
no, like yeah.
the other point, there's one final point I'll make, and that's this. If I were using YouTube to incite hatred or to encourage a mad mob to attack somebody, then yes, what you're saying about responsibility would certainly come into it. That would no longer be a question of free speech. If I were encouraging violence or hatred or contempt for people, then yes, there would be something in that. I'm not doing anything of the sort. I'm discussing various things, various ideas from a particular perspective. I don't believe that. Certainly, there are some racists that make comments on my videos. I'm not at all sure that I say anything which is inflammatory. Maybe I say things which can't, strictly speaking, be backed up by references and sources. But I don't think that what I say is deliberately misleading, untruthful, or liable to provoke violence.
I mean, that's not the standard I'm saying. I'm saying all I'm saying, and maybe this is a good point to like end the video, is that like as a like published historian with many books out, somebody who people are going to look to as an authority figure, and who I've seen from my community that people are looking to as an authority figure, with a large audience of almost 70,000 subscribers. Congratulations, by the way.
Mm.
I feel that as a published historian, you should have a higher standard for the content you're putting out in the public eye than, oh, it's not really serious, it doesn't matter that much. It can be misleading if I want it to be. I
No,
think it's
no,
acceptable for the person.
no. Sorry, there's a misunderstanding. I haven't said that anything on those videos which is deliberately misleading. I may possibly have made a brief video without thinking every aspect through, and that may come across as being misleading. I've never said anything on those videos which I regard was done with deliberate intention of misleading people.
Well, okay. I mean, I think just going forward, I think literally as simple a thing as like saying what it is you're talking about in each video, even just from a narrative point of view, would be better. Like saying, I'm going to talk about standpoint epistemology. This term was coined by so and so in such and such a paper. I see YouTubers do this all the time. It's really common.
Yes, I'm sure
Um,
you, yes, I dare say people do. But that's really not what I'm up to here. These are chats with people. It's as though someone's dropped in to speak to them. It's not a question of defining terms and making sure that everything is scrupulously. Yes, sometimes the things that I say will be inaccurate. It's not intentional, and sometimes in the comments people mention it, and then I correct what I've said.
Well, okay. I don't think we're going to see eye to eye yet on this issue, but I think maybe we ought to like bring the conversation to a close now.
Yes,
I
yep.
think we've gone over some good points and had some fruitful discussions. I mean, I will say that there's lots of things that on your channel that I I disagree, but I don't know much about it, so I'm not going to sort of speak very strongly about it. Like, where are we here? You have a video about the great replacement. Is a great replacement the great
Oh, the Great
reset?
Replacement. That's
Re
complete madness. That's
okay,
no,
cool.
no, no. The Great Replacement theory is one of these crank conspiracy theories.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm genuinely very glad to hear you say that.
It's a, like the Kalergi plan. You must have heard of that as well.
No, clergy clan.
No, the idea is that the Jews are behind some vast conspiracy to replace Europeans with black Africans. It's all, yeah, I know. I know. Honestly, you don't want to know about this, but there are. Yeah, it's the Great Reset and Agenda 2030. That is not advocating the idea that that's a genuine thing.
Right, good. This is good. Yeah, I mean,
A
I'm
lot of
always
the
in.
people, yeah, a lot of the people that comment here don't like Jews. You probably picked that up.
Mm.
If you look at the comments, a lot of the people there are anti-Semitic.
So how do
You
you
know,
feel about having these kinds of people in
I'm a
your audience?
Zionist. I'm a Zionist. I spent years in Israel.
Oh, interesting. I mean,
No,
if I'm
not really. No, but it's
like,
something that make a lot of people think that I'm a Jew. But
okay,
yeah, I spent many years in Israel. I'm a Zionist, and and nevertheless, a lot of the people commenting there make anti-Semitic remarks.
oh goodness, I'm sorry people do
No,
that.
no, it doesn't bother me. I mean, it's one of those things. But, you get a lot of it on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm always impressed with like some of these anti-Semites, how they seem to think Jewish people are incredibly productive people that are capable of a great deal, and it makes me almost envious. I wish I could be as powerful a Jew as they think actually exists. I'd be marvelous. But okay, this was a good. Thank you, Simon, for having this chat and allowing us to go through these issues. Yeah, I've said my piece. We've managed to go into some issues a bit more. Thank you for having the chat. If there's anything you want to ask me, you can like feel free to. Otherwise, you can like call it a day.
No, I can't think there's anything else really. Let me know if you want to do this again. If I upset or offend or annoy you, and you want to question me about any videos, don't hesitate to get in touch. You have
I
both.
will be most triggered by your cis heteronormative white male privilege, and I will cancel you on Twitter, which I on the Twitter which I am not on. um,
No, seriously, you've got my email address. You've even got my telephone number.
yes.
If there's anything that I say that you find, shockingly offensive, or you think is mischievous or dangerous, by all means tell me, and I'll be happy to discuss it.
Well, okay, brilliant. I will do. You have a great day, Simon.
You too, fella. It's been nice talking to you. Yeah.
Likewise. Bye.
Cheerio. Bye.